Huh? Okay. So, let me know what you think of my new setup. I think I'm slowly working out the kinks. Just turn this that way. I think I'm slowly working out the kinks of the chat stand. So let me know what you guys think. Or if I should just, go back to the way I had it. But I think I've hit the sweet spot of how I used to do videos and now with my chat stand. And you can see what I'm wearing. All right, so let's get to the article about the media. How Trump loathes thee, let me count the ways. So, Trump's media censorship arsenal is growing. So, let's see all the ways he's trying to destroy the media. Let me first figure out how to... here we are. Now I can read. In legal circles, it wasn't the monetary figure in Disney's $15 million deal to resolve defamation claims from President-elect Donald Trump that was surprising, or even the fact that the network settled at all. It was the timing. Disney opted to dispose of the case before trying its luck on summary judgment, a routine step in civil litigation in which the court evaluates evidence and the merit of claims to decide whether a trial is necessary. ABC News had a strong case. Though he said E. Jean Carroll wasn't raped within the narrow technical meaning of the term, U.S. District Judge Lewis Kaplan made clear that the verdict didn't mean that the writer failed to prove that Mr. Trump raped her, as many people commonly understand the word. He underscored the jury found that Mr. Trump in fact did exactly that. So, just move that a little. But, Trump apologists will try to convince you that sexual abuse is somehow, not only is it not rape, but they treat it like it's not that big of a deal, because if it isn't rape, then nothing bad happened, because there's no in between. The court could have decided that Trump, who targeted George Stephanopoulos' coverage, saying he was found liable for rape when he was actually found liable for sexual abuse, didn't have a viable legal claim and dismissed the lawsuit. As a public figure, prevailing on a defamation claim is a Herculean task. At the heart of modern American libel law is decades of jurisprudence, building on a landmark First Amendment decision in New York Times versus Sullivan. The 1964 ruling established a defense-friendly framework requiring public figures to prove that those who made defamatory statements knew they were false or had serious doubts about their accuracy. The standard is a powerful shield for networks and publications that report erroneous information in good faith. Right, because people make mistakes. I mean, they're human beings. They make mistakes. They might have thought that they covered every angle and got all the facts right, but sometimes it doesn't happen. That's why when you're watching, you can just, let people know. You made this mistake. You made that mistake. People make mistakes. My brother just wrote an obit for my dad. He got the year wrong that we came to Wausau. He got the year wrong. He put 72 when it was 73. It was a mistake. And, okay, he made the mistake. I pointed it out to him. But, in the end of the day, this is not a big deal. But if it were a major mistake, then, publications issue corrections. Actually, some people issue a correction even when it isn't a big deal because they want people to know that, oops, I made a mistake, and I'm acknowledging I made a mistake, because that's what people should do. They should acknowledge that, oops, I was wrong. So, but to go after Trump to go after George Stephanopoulos, even though he didn't really make a mistake, because a lot of people consider sexual abuse rape, because even in my mind, there isn't a lot of difference. I mean, obviously, rape means penetration in my mind. So, but in other people's minds, sexual assault and rape are the same thing. Or sexual abuse and rape are the same thing. So, is it really wrong? Maybe technically it's not. Maybe technically it is, but in the grand scheme of things, people know what the hell he meant. So, in 2016, the ever litigious Trump threatened to open up libel laws to make suing for defamation easier. That never materialized, but a favorable ruling for ABC on summary judgment in his lawsuit could have become a vehicle for the Supreme Court to review Times versus Sullivan, a doomsday scenario for ABC News and parent Disney, along with the rest of media. Involved the justices overturning the central doctrine in the decision. Libel lawsuits and liability insurance would skyrocket. So that's probably why Disney didn't, that they just settled. It's not that they wanted to kowtow to Trump, or that, that they're trying to win favorability with him, which isn't going to happen. It's that they are worried that the Supreme Court would make it easier to sue for libel in general. And they want to prevent that, because look at the UK. It's extremely easy to sue for libel. The libel laws there are very lax. So, or I should say very strict. So, yeah, people have to really be careful, because if they are not 100% sure that they're correct about something, they can't say it. I mean, that's just chilling. Because people should be allowed to get things wrong. I mean, you would hope that journalists would not get things wrong, but they're human. They can misinterpret something that they heard or read. It's very easy to make a mistake. So, but you shouldn't sue people for that. You should first point out that, no, this is a mistake. And then if they're being hard asses about it because they can't accept that they made a mistake, then I could see you going and suing for defamation. But if they're like, oops, I'll correct it, then what's the harm? I mean, granted, there are some people who will remember the mistake and not the correction. That's always a possibility. But at least you have it out there. People can point to that and say, yes, they said that at first, but then they realized they made a mistake and they corrected it. In 2016, oops, I read that. The specter of Trump toppling a pillar of First Amendment jurisprudence has emerged as one of several weapons in his censorship arsenal. It includes novel claims and lawsuits intended to chill free speech that push legal boundaries, threats to utilize the levers of government to retaliate against networks critical of him, and dangling carrots of selective regulatory enforcement. Meaning that they will revoke your license or regulate you in some manner so that you're not able to do your business simply because you were critical of Trump. Trump's latest legal salvo came on December 16th when he sued pollster J. Ann Seltzer, the Des Moines Register, and Gannett, the newspaper's parent company. The lawsuit brings in claims for a violation of Iowa's consumer protection law, which bans deceptive advertising, for brazen election interference over releasing a poll showing a Vice President Kamala Harris leading in Iowa, which Trump won. It's a way to bypass the legal barriers to asserting defamation. Now, this is where the chilling part comes in. She put out a poll. It's not like this poll came out of her ass. She polled a sample of people, which normally her samples are accurate. Her polls are generally accurate. This time, for whatever reason, they weren't. Polls sometimes are wrong. Ann Seltzer's poll obviously was wrong this time. It doesn't usually happen, but it was wrong this time for whatever reason. It doesn't mean that she intentionally did a bad poll. And how is this election interference? I did this in my video on this lawsuit. How is it election interference? You have polls. Some polls are right, some polls are wrong. And granted, Trump thinks that the only polls that are good polls are the polls where it's shown of him winning, which shouldn't surprise anyone. But still, there are polls that are good. There are polls that get things wrong. There are polls that get things right. There are polls that get things wrong. There are polls that make the right prediction, but maybe not by the right margin. It's just, there's so much. So that doesn't mean that it's election interference, because if that were the case, then there would be no polls. And deceptive advertising, again, it's not an ad, it's a poll. And yes, this one was wrong, but dude, you won. What are you complaining about? I mean, I could almost understand it if he lost, because, okay, then you can, whine that this poll said he was going to lose and he ended up losing. So obviously election interference. Still horrible logic, but at least there's a through line. Right now he's saying, when election interference because I won. I don't think that's what he wants to say, but that's basically what I'm hearing. It's like basically saying that he didn't think he was supposed to win, or he didn't want to win, or something. It was very bizarre. All right. The arguments outlined in the complaint mark a new roadmap for Trump and his legal team to chill free speech by weaponizing the courts. In October, he sued CBS News for a violation of Texas's consumer protection law covering deceptive advertising. He alleged the network's segment with Harris misled the public, targeting the inclusion of a longer section of her response to a question about the conflict in the Middle East. Trump seeks $10 billion. Now, granted, the clip that was aired, and because it's a clip, of course, they don't add nuance, and her actual answer was more nuanced, but did it really contradict what she said in the clip? I mean, it didn't give the full answer, but no sensible, reasonable human being would look at a clip and think, yeah, that's her full answer. There's nothing more to it. I mean, I guess this is where the it is for the people who, hear a headline and don't bother to read the article because it just says what they want to hear and moves on, instead of reading the article and finding out that the headline is just clickbait and the article actually contradicts the headline. So maybe he thinks most people do that. I mean, I honestly do not know what he's talking about. Why that is such a big deal. TV shows show clips. If you were to do that, you should sue the pants off Marvel, because, and actually a lot of shows and movies, because they selectively edit things to look like something that it isn't. You think something is going to happen, but they have, mashed together different parts of the movie. So it's not one continuous, they're not just showing you one continuous scene. They're showing you snippets from different parts of the movie or TV show. So, but nobody claims that I'm going to sue you because I thought such and such was going to happen, and it turned out that the show was slightly different, that went in a different direction. You don't do that, because people understand that there could be outtakes in the trailer. It shouldn't be, but sometimes there are outtakes in trailers, and that because there are selective editing, so people might think that one thing's going to happen and turns out it's another thing, because they don't want to give away a certain plot point. But nobody is going to sue a movie studio or a TV studio because of the way they edited their shows. It's the same thing here. Okay, so Kamala Harris gave a more nuanced answer that there's this thing, but we've also got to look at this. If you think that was all there was to her answer and you were satisfied, then you probably would not have watched the interview to see what else she had to say, because you probably were like, yeah, that's all I need to hear. Then you probably weren't watching the interview anyway. Anyway, the lawsuits are likely destined for dismissal, but by Trump's thinking, that doesn't matter. We have to straighten out the press, he said at a news conference on December 16th, previewing the legal action. And last year, the ever-litigious Trump stumbled onto a novel copyright issue when he brought a lawsuit against Bob Woodward and his publisher, Simon & Schuster, over the public release of audio recordings from their interviews for Bob Woodward's book, The Trump Tapes. More than 8 hours of excerpts from the interviews were published as an audiobook, and Trump has claimed he's entitled to all or most of those profits because he only granted Woodward permission to use his responses in a book. The dispute raises unsettled questions about the copyright interest of the parties in an interview. And I don't know enough about copyright law to know if Trump has a case or not. I just have no clue. Also in Trump's arsenal, loyalists serving as heads of regulatory agencies who can steer networks away from coverage critical of him and his administration. Incoming FCC Chairman Brendan Carr is already on the offensive, threatening to revoke broadcast licenses for stations owned by networks that have drawn Trump's ire. He's pointed to the agency's authority to ensure that public airwaves operate in the public interest. It's a long shot considering there aren't any TV station licenses up for renewal until 2028. And pulling one in the middle of a term is essentially unheard of, but long-term incentives to stay out of Trump's crosshairs by toning down adversarial coverage persist. I can't remember who said it, but they they are experts on authoritarianism, and he wrote that do not obey in advance. And it sounds like there are TV stations who are doing just that. Um, I hope that Bob Woodward wins his lawsuit again that Trump brought against him for releasing an audiobook, because it's still a book. I mean, I don't understand what the distinction is. Just because it's not a printed book, it's still a book. I mean, the audiobook is literally just reading the printed book for people who either can't read because they just don't have time, so during their commute they listen to books, or they're visually impaired and they need need to listen to a book as opposed to reading, because reading is just too hard or impossible. So I just don't see how that. I mean, granted, I do not know copyright law, so it could be that copyright law is thoroughly behind the times. That's a possibility. But to have the FCC chair threaten people with pulling their licenses, even though there are no licenses up for renewal, that might not stop people like this. He might still want to pull the license simply because he can, or he thinks he can. So, and I'm worried that TV stations are going to are going to obey in advance, which legacy media is not as popular as it used to be, because people have other sites that they can go to. This is going to totally kill legacy media if they decide to kowtow to a tyrant because they're afraid that of the consequences. Because it's kind of hard to um trust these media organizations if they are afraid to criticize the president. I mean, they just shouldn't have to be afraid to criticize the president. So, yes. Let's see. These incentives include merger approval from the Justice Department's Antitrust Division and FTC, to be led by Gail Slater and Andrew Ferguson, respectively. And deals with the potential to transform the long-term trajectory of a company. Carr has emphasized that CBS's 60 Minutes interview with Harris should be considered in its review of Skydance's pending purchase of Paramount. A quagmire has emerged. Side with Trump and possibly get favorable regulatory decisions, or face the specter of retaliation. Now, for those who don't know, Paramount is in financial trouble. So they want to merge with Skydance. If this FCC chairman decides that because CBS aired this interview, which wasn't even critical of Trump, it was just that there was a clip of Harris saying one thing, and then in the interview she went into more detail, because that's what interviews do. You go into more detail. Just because Trump is incapable of doing such things because he only thinks in sound bites, or only speaks in sound bites, doesn't mean most people act like that. People are able to expound on ideas. And obviously, that clip would have been too long for whatever commercial they aired, because commercials are expensive. So but to think about it, that CBS might tank. They might tank this merger with Skydance, something that Paramount seriously needs because they are in financial dire straits. That could go down the toilet simply because someone was butthurt that Kamala Harris knows how to speak nuance, as opposed to, this is the soundbite, you don't need to actually listen to the rest of the answer. All right. That dynamic has shined a spotlight on the power that Trump will wield over deal-making in a fashion atypical of previous administrations. Media execs have noticed. In September, Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav and Elon Musk were seen sitting next to each other at the U.S. Open. The next month, WBD, or Warner Brothers Division, hosted Tesla for its robo-taxi rollout event, which led to the studio getting sued for misappropriating Blade Runner 2049. For Zaslav, the lawsuit might have been worth it. He gets access to the foremost Trump whisperer, and along with him, Trump's ear if he were to pursue a regulatory risky deal. Eyeing a spin-off of its legacy TV assets, WBD earlier this month reorganized its corporate structure by separating its streaming and studio divisions in a move meant to bolster its strategic flexibility. Deal-making is in the air, and with it, a motive for Zaslav to mandate from CNN less adversarial coverage of Trump than during his previous term. And I'm surprised that this article didn't that they just called Musk a Trump whisperer, as opposed to what a lot of people are calling him, president-elect. Now, again, that is chilling, because these conglomerates are so big that in order for Disney to, say, be able to do one thing or the other, they have to put the reins on ABC News. Same thing with Warner Brothers, that they might chill CNN's coverage of Trump simply because David Zaslav wouldn't get the deals that he wants, or get be able to do whatever he thinks his business needs. So that's not great. Not great at all. I mean, I hope that these organizations don't indeed acquiesce to Trump's demands, that they're not as critical of him, or not critical at all, because, again, legacy media is there. The mainstream media is there, so people will get fair and balanced viewpoints. And Trump is threatening to upset that. So people who might not have completely tuned out these media stations, these media news organizations, might just say, you know what, I'm going to get my news from this place or that place. And that might be an organization that does have a specific leaning, whether it's left or right. The great thing about these legacy media, this mainstream media, is that they are, for the most part, fair and balanced. And I say for the most part because there are certain issues where you shouldn't have to be balanced. There isn't There isn't a pro and con to certain issues. Not everything is a two-sided issue. There are some things that don't have another side. So, but yeah, this could be very chilling to learn that certain mainstream media can no longer be trusted simply because you don't know if they're being truthful or if they're trying to appease Trump, or that maybe he might allow a little bit of criticism or maybe no criticism at all. I mean, I I do learn stuff from comedy shows like Colbert and The Daily Show, but that shouldn't be their job to teach you what's in the news. That should be the journalist's job. And we already have a culture where comedians seem to ask harder questions than journalists. So if this keeps up with these organizations afraid to question Trump, because then they wouldn't be able to do what they want to do on the entertainment side, then you're going to basically have to rely on maybe social media, foreign media, possibly, comedy shows. I mean, grant if they're still allowed to have comedy shows, because if they can silence the news division in order to prop up their entertainment, would they also be willing to silence political comedy? So this could get really bad really fast. Because as it stands now, like I said, I do learn stuff from comedy shows that I don't learn from journalists. But the fact still remains, and I do listen to podcasts because Crooked Media is run by former Obama staffers, so I do listen to that podcast. So there could be ways around it. I don't know how podcasting works. If I assume that they don't need a regulatory license, an FTC license, but not all of them. I trust Crooked Media, but they're still a progressive media. And some people might not want to, and I don't just listen to them. I want to get people who are, and actually, even though they're progressive in their views, they're also realistic in how government works. But they sometimes express views I don't agree with. So I might want to have different news sources. If you silence legacy media to prevent them from criticizing Trump, that's just going to push people away from legacy media. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because even though Pod Save America I consider to be fairly reasonable, just this idea that they consider themselves progressive media. We should be allowed to be able to watch media that doesn't necessarily have a political bent. It should be, this is what's happening in the world. And, maybe depending on the news story, to hear from the newscaster their opinion of it. Like when Walter Cronkite, when Richard Nixon realized that Vietnam needs to end because he's lost Walter Cronkite. Things like that. Big news stories. But for the most part, they don't put in their opinions. So to have to go into a situation where you don't have a choice because there's no more mainstream media, so you have to go either more right or more left. That's just going to polarize things further because you're going to only hear what you want to hear. And I want to learn the news and not necessarily a political bent. I can make my own decision. I do not need people to tell me what to think. So I don't know. Like I said, I listen to Pod Save America. I listen to a lot of crooked media podcasts. And what I like about Pod Save America is that they don't necessarily tell you what to think. They discuss the pros and cons of an issue, even though they consider themselves progressive media. But because they consider themselves progressive media, a lot of people won't listen to them because they don't consider themselves progressive. And so if we are stuck with progressive media or right-wing media, even if some of them are actually reasonable, there are people who are not going to listen to certain media on, whatever side simply because of how they're built. So how is that helpful? How does that help anyone? So anyway, that is all I have for this video. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.